Hi there. Today I had a field visit and I've spent half of the day with a hard hat on, so I don't know what to do with my hair, but it's okay. I really want to finish this interview, so I'm going to do the introductory video now, even though I look like this. But this time we are going back in time again, back to January 2025, to the interview Jorge and I did to Dr. Campbell Price. It was a very nice interview, very long because we talk a lot, but it was like interviewing a friend. Campbell and I met 2 years ago, I think, so it was a very easy conversation, and I have added some pictures and links and information related to the topics discussed. I just hope you like it. And please go to the links and so on, because it's taken some time for me to collect the information. So please do. And yes, I know the grades are showing. I need to do my hair, but life's like that. Hello, Dr. Campbell Price. Thanks for being here. Welcome to La
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about your career, about your experiences in Egypt. So please tell us about your thesis. Your thesis was focused on non-royal studies in temple, particularly the Karnak cachet. Please tell us more about it.
Yes, so thank you for asking. It was something I worked on, gosh. I finished it, I guess, 15 years ago nearly, and I'm still trying to revisit this topic, the subject, to revise it for publication. But when I was a student, I studied at Liverpool University in the UK. I grew up in Scotland, so I had to move to Liverpool, which was very exciting. Liverpool's a great city. At Liverpool, there was a real focus on texts. And so my main interest was in translating hieroglyphic texts on these statues, as you say, non-royal statues, from the Karnak cachet, a very interesting context, because the cachet, the kind of hiding place, the pit in which they were found, was huge. You walk over it in the so-called Cour de la Cachette, the Cachette Court today at Karnak, and you would not know it was there. You can read the signage. But this contained an absolutely huge, huge collection of statues of kings, gods, and of non-royal people. And it struck me when I was a student that people tend to be obsessed with the gods and with kings, but especially non-royal people, the officials, the priests from Dynasty 25, so around 750 BC and later, they kind of got ignored. So that's why I focused on those. And it was exciting collaborating with some French colleagues who were documenting and digitizing some of the documents. I spent a week in Lyon in France, looking at the photographic archives, and it was exciting to be reading the texts, some of them untranslated, certainly not translated into English. So the PhD thesis was about what was the purpose of statues, because statuary sculpture in ancient Egypt was not made to be stuck in a museum. We assume, because we understand objects in our own terms, that everything was made for the purpose we believe it was, believe it should be used in. This is nonsense. Ancient uses of objects are very different, sometimes quite surprising. So my interest, abiding interest, my continuing interest is in how objects were experienced, how living people interacted with monuments. So this was the focus of my PhD thesis.
Okay, that sounds interesting. So you were saying that you did your thesis 15 years ago and that you
Yes.
were already digitizing, or the French team was already digitizing some of the objects. That's interesting for me. And here also in La Fábrica de la Ciencia, we're interested in new technologies. What kind of technologies were they using to digitize these objects?
So I should say the project is accessible online as the Karnak Cachette database project. I contributed in a very small way to that. So that was basically the standard method of digitization we might use. So if you have a photograph, you scan it, you put it online, a high resolution photograph, which is very useful for researchers. But now there is a project, a kind of successor project, about inscriptions on these late period statues. And so that involves really using human intelligence, not artificial intelligence, human intelligence, to transcribe the hieroglyphs. And once all the hieroglyphs are transcribed, it's an ongoing project, I believe, led by French colleagues, it may be possible to do something else, to analyze that huge amount of data. Because the statues I was looking at, gosh, there were maybe 450 statues I examined by eye, by sight, by old-fashioned methods. And maybe you could use artificial intelligence to see if there are comparisons, there are certain phrases in the language used in the hieroglyphic script, certain signs formed in a certain way. I can't speak for my French colleagues, and I certainly have not actively been pursuing that research in the last 15 years. So I'm sorry to say, I can't tell you.
Okay. No, that's interesting. And it's very interesting to know there are online resources that are free to access for everyone, because this is kind of a very important information. So since you finished your PhD, how did you went from there to becoming the curator of Egypt and Sudan at Manchester?
Well, by luck, purely by luck, by being in the right place at the right time, as so often in life. You find yourself in the right place at the right time. So I finished my PhD thesis. I had the examination at the beginning of 2011, so 14 years ago. And at the same time, I was working a few hours each week in the University Museum, the Archaeology Museum at Liverpool. And through that, I got involved in another project about examining smaller local Egyptology collections in the UK. And then, miracle of miracles, a job came up at Manchester University, which was only, goodness, a 45-minute train ride away from Liverpool. And so I applied, and I remember very clearly the job was involved redisplaying the Egyptology collection. A lot of that work had already been done. I inherited some old plans, but they were really interested in public engagement, and especially engagement with school children, because Manchester Museum has a very big young audience. And so because I had some experience of using Egyptology collections through my few hours a week in my museum job at Liverpool, explaining them to children, this was very important. So I was in the very, very fortunate position to graduate, I think in the middle of 2011, and I got the job at Manchester, I think in the November. So I very fortunately got a job quite quickly.
Okay, so there was kind of a transition from...
A transition, yes.
Yeah, from the university to the museum. That's very interesting.
Yes.
And what is your role, your current role at the museum? What is your daily routine like? What do you do? What are the most interesting projects? Things like that.
So the job of curator really is to look after and to be a spokesperson for the collection. So we have a big collection of botany, of living animals, of zoology, of anthropology. So Egyptology sits in a very big museum. Actually, Manchester University Museum is the biggest university museum in Britain in terms of the collection. We have 4.5 million specimens, of which 18,000 are from ancient Egypt and Sudan. So it's one of the biggest in the UK, one of the most significant, in fact, in Europe. So my job really day to day usually is to answer inquiries about the collection and make the collection accessible to researchers through physical means, but also through digital means. Communication is very important, whether it is, writing a scholarly article perhaps about a piece or speaking to you now for a podcast. Anything that gets the word out about Manchester Museum is very important. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to a Spanish audience. But another important thing is organizing exhibitions. So in my time at the museum, I have helped organize two big traveling exhibitions, one around the United Kingdom, another internationally in America and in China. And at the moment, in fact, I'm right in the middle of a 2-year research secondment where I'm spending some time at work and some time doing research. And that is specifically about ancient Egyptian faces and faces in museums and how the public understand recreations of faces. So that is very rewarding. And that's something really I'm working on right now. Just before I joined you, I had some meetings about this. And I hope this will lead to, in the future, maybe in a year or two, to another book and an exhibition. So that's what I'm doing.
That's very interesting. And what are the most important pieces of the collection in Manchester Museum? What are your
Well,
favorite pieces?
well, goodness, it changes every day. Your favorite pieces might be different to mine. I would say out of 18,000 objects, it depends often on how many inquiries you get in a day about certain things. If someone asks you about something you have never thought about, or maybe you've never even physically seen, and you go away and check it and send the information to the researcher, suddenly you become enthusiastic for that Middle Kingdom statue or the Roman period model figurine or toy or whatever. So it changes every day. I would say among the highlights definitely are a single piece of limestone, which in Egyptology we call an ostrakon, which is, a little post-it note equivalent in ancient times. And it has a sketch on it of a funeral. And it's very unlike anything really we have from pharaonic times. And it must be from Thebes, Western Thebes, maybe Deir el-Medina. And it's just fantastic. Another thing which is not terribly display worthy, but which is very special to me, is a very battered, damaged lower section of a statue of a man we know very well from ancient Egypt, from the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, and that is a man called Senenmut. And it was, in fact, a German colleague, the late Professor Rainer Hannig, who raised the possibility, based on the hieroglyphs, that it could be Senenmut. And I investigated it a bit further, and indeed I proved and published the piece as a piece of Senenmut. And that has led me on to really get into Senenmut's life. And I'm now, as a result of this discovery in the Manchester Museum storerooms, I'm writing a biography of Senenmut. So I would say that has to be one of my favorite pieces, but it changes every day.
Okay, that's very nice. I have to say, I love that piece. You said that Ostrakhan
Yeah,
of the funeral. I took a picture of it last time when I was at Manchester
yes.
Museum. It's amazing. I really love it. It's like very cute
Yes,
because
it's very
it looks
fresh. It
like a
looks,
sketch. It's
yeah, it's very
like a
informal.
sketch made by a kid or something. So
Yeah.
it's really charming, I would say.
Yes, and also we don't really know why it was made. It's not obvious what its purpose was in fact. So I like those kind of objects where you can have a discussion, a debate about how they were used and why they were made.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. Okay, let's go to the topic about Hatshepsut and Senmnut a little bit later, because before that,
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about your experience in the field. Have you had the chance to work in Egypt in an archaeological excavation?
Yes, this was something really, I guess, when people think of Egyptology, they often think of people out in the desert digging digging things up. So, like many of us, as a kid, I was obsessed with archaeologists and the idea of going and discovering something secret or hidden and making some great find that would reveal something. And when I was, I guess, 19, so I was studying at Liverpool University, the chance came up to go and excavate in, in Egypt. And I took that chance and was very lucky to get the chance to go. And so that was the excavation of a fortress on the very western side of the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. So it's really towards Libya, the Libyan coast. The ancient name is, well, I don't think we know the ancient name of the site, but the modern Arabic name is Zawayat el Rakam, and it was the westernmost fortress of King Ramesses II. And so one of my professors, one of my lecturers, Stephen Snape, was excavating there. And I was part of quite a small team, maybe 5 or 6 of us, who went to help our Egyptian colleagues. And I guess I spent 2 or 3 weeks there, but it was really eye-opening. We didn't really do much excavation, but we did some, or helped with some geophysical scanning. And that was interesting because clearly you could see what was going on under the ground without excavating anything, without damaging anything. And so as a result of that, a couple of years later, I joined the only Scottish Egyptian project led by the late, great Ian Matheson. And I became quite involved with that geophysical project of Saqqara. It was a geophysical mapping project. And this was really something, really an honor, a privilege to get to work at Saqqara and to work around the step pyramid. So we began, when I joined the project, we began at the north, then we moved to the east, and then we moved down to the south over 4 seasons. And every season we were finding dozens, if not hundreds, of undiscovered tombs. So that was a great privilege, but it's a strange thing. As soon as I finished my PhD and actually got a job that paid me to do Egyptology, this is when the opportunity to actually do fieldwork disappeared. So now I only really go to Egypt to visit museums, to do museum-based research, and to accompany tours. And I know you and I, Alicia, we met in Cairo recently, in between our
In Luxor,
commitments
also
at
in the
so.
conference.
But this is how you make friends and make connections at conferences. But in terms of active fieldwork, I have not had the chance for maybe 15 years.
Okay, and that's a pity. Would you like to do something else in the field? Would you like to combine both sides of your career?
I think museum work is so interesting and stimulating, and it is itself an excavation. You really do have the feeling with a lot of museums that they are like unexcavated archaeological sites. So, in the same way, if you find something, you have to do your research and put things into context. So, I think there's probably enough undiscovered material in Manchester Museum to keep me going for a few years yet. I might quite like to compare, I guess, some of the things we have in Manchester from certain sites with the objects which are being found at those same sites today through active excavation, but who knows, maybe in the future.
How is the relationship between the different museums? For example, when you have a fragment of a stela or
Mm.
an artifact, and you know, or maybe you don't know, you suspect, you guess that there is another piece or another fragment of a piece in another museum. How do you share information? How do you interact with other museums? Because of course, I assume that when you organize temporary exhibitions that are moving from one museum to the other, okay, that there is an interaction between museums there. But from a research point of view, how does that go?
This is a really good question. And as you said, with exhibitions, you would hope people might see the exhibition, or you produce a book to accompany the exhibition that tells someone, even if they did not visit the exhibition, what was in it, what were the themes, what are the topics, what's the research. A really important job of mine as the curator of Egypt and Sudan is really just to disseminate information, to say we have this material. Now, we have a very exciting announcement that next week we hope we're going to relaunch our online catalogue. And in the past, before 5 years ago, there was another version of the online catalogue, which was basic, but it was still usable. And this was a research tool for colleagues working in the field. And actually, I had to give you one example. A Spanish colleague, Jose Manuel Galan, I'm sorry for the pronunciation, he had found and was excavating material that named an individual, a chap called Intef Mose, who lived in the early 18th dynasty, about 1500 BC. And even a Google search revealed Manchester Museum had a statue without a head. And so Jose brought the head, a 3D print of the head. And it was kind of this exciting moment where someone really wants to make the join because he knew there was a museum collection that held this object. Sadly, the head did not fit. The head was too big for the statue. But it just proves the kind of linking that happens. So I know in the case of some colleagues in the Netherlands, in Leiden, and in Italy, they have relief blocks, limestone relief blocks, which come from certain sites, certain tombs at Saqqara, and they have sent, in fact, 3D prints back to the excavation of those tombs. And so now you can visit the tomb and entire walls are being reconstructed. So I think maybe this is the future, either for physical restitution, and by that I mean actually returning objects in some cases where they were maybe proven to be stolen, or sending physical replicas, or, and this is really exciting, digital recreations where there are 20 blocks in 20 museums. If all the museums agree, Manchester Museum would agree to have the block scanned, you can digitally recreate that space, and then you can make it available for people who cannot get to Egypt. I mean, we're lucky that we can go to Egypt, but many people are not so lucky they can't get on a plane. So I would like to see more of those digital reconstructions as a way of putting separate objects, disparate objects into context.
Absolutely. I'm very interested in this topic. And also I like to visit museums. I studied a master in museum management. So I'm very much into this new ideas, how to apply new technologies in museums. And in this regard, what you're saying, it's super interesting. And also for disabled people, blind people, or
Sure.
It's super interesting. And there are very good ideas. When I like to visit any kind of museum, it doesn't have to be only about Egyptology or
Yeah.
only about ancient Egypt.
Same.
But I like to see what people in museums are coming up with, the ideas they are performing and developing, because there are many good ideas around. Do you have had any inspiration from other museums to apply in Manchester? Because of course there are many different ideas, many different situations and circumstances, but you can maybe not steal ideas, but just copy.
Yeah.
If something works, Um, why wouldn't you apply it in your museum? It's a good thing to learn.
Exactly. I think, like you, I'm very interested in visiting other museums around the world. If I'm happen to be in a particular place, a museum is usually the first place I go to before the cocktail bar. But y you find, I think, museums are curators and museum staff are very friendly and very collegial. They will share not only things that work well, but things that do not work well. And people often ask, what is the thing, I wish we hadn't done? And I think being too reliant on digital technology, like having an app that maybe sometimes doesn't work. This is an issue, at least in Manchester Museum. In the past, we try to force people onto their phones 10, 15 years ago when they didn't want to be on their phones, they wanted to look at objects. Um, Maybe things are changing now because people are more on their phones than they were. But basic things like there's a great uh, display in the Rijksmuseum in Leiden, the National Museum of Antiquities, in which they have, as you do in Spain, in Madrid, and in New York, one of these Nubian temples, which has been relocated as part of the new UNESCO Nubian Temples project, and they daily project color onto it using light, a kind of light show. And it's so effective to remind people that ancient Egypt was not so many colors of beige and brown. It was actually very colorful. So that was something that always in the back of my mind, I thought, if we could get enough stonework out on display, we could do something similar. Something in the Grand Museum I really like was the idea of taking something quite small, something quite typical like a mirror, and then setting it against like a really striking line drawing of that object being used. I was there recently when we were in Cairo in November, and something that's very low technology. It doesn't require any digital intervention, but just having some sense of how an object was used is really helpful, I think, for visitors. And finally, this is not my work, but the work of my colleagues in digital accessibility, physical accessibility, working with a school for children with autism in Manchester. We developed a tactile interactive, which was actually made of stone. It was lasered stone. So when you talk about laser printing or 3D printing, you'd think about resin and plastic. And that always seems like a kind of poor relation or a second best option. If you have a copy of something, often it has to be made of resin or nylon, something synthetic. But this was a technology which used a 3D scan data of a stela in our collection, which was far too fragile to be put on display and could never really be handled. So already you have an opportunity. The object is too fragile, so we need to record it. It's broken into different pieces. But if you scan the pieces, you can then digitally recreate it. Then you take the data, and then I don't know quite how it works. You then laser real stone. Then you use technology, like touch sensitive technology, to prime the surface so that maybe if you have visual impairment, or you just want to know something about a great big bit of stone with lots of Egyptian figures on it, you can touch the stone and feel the stone. It's not damaging anything because it's not an original object, but it's a one-to-one replica. And then there's an audio or visual representation of information about each aspect of the stone. So I'm often asked, what do the hieroglyphs mean? Why is that woman sat in that way? Why is that man dressed like that? All of that information was put into the kind of digital interpretation. So you could have my interpretation, an Egyptologist, or you could have the class of kids at this school in Manchester, the Grange. So that to me was one of the more cutting edge areas where a physical experience, tactile experience met really cutting edge digital technology and something good, interesting was created.
Yeah, certainly this is a very long topic. We could be discussing about this forever
Yes.
because actually I was going to ask you, this is going to be a quick question because I know you have visited the Grand Egyptian Museum in Cairo. I was also there
Yes.
a few days
Yes.
before you were
Yeah.
here. We have already had this conversation. I would like to know your opinion again.
Okay. About the museum generally.
Yeah, because it's been such we have been waiting for so long for this museum to open. What were your expectations?
Ooh. Oh gosh.
Has it surpassed your expectations? Has it been a disappointment?
I could
Should I shut
talk,
up?
yeah, for
Not
hours
asking.
about this. So it surpassed my expectations in many ways. And it's interesting now, this is really a topic when we're talking now in the beginning of 2025. There was an announcement, I don't know, from the Egyptian government yesterday that the museum will open soon. The museum is open. It has been open for over a year. It's kind of a phased opening. And so the galleries that we both visited last year, I think are really impressive because the sheer amount of information, the number of objects is huge. It's an Egyptologist's museum. It's somewhere that you need some background. You need to know what a dynasty is. You have to have some knowledge about the geography of Egypt because there's rather few maps and there are rather few timelines. But the stuff is just breathtaking, it's huge and you need to be able to walk around all day. But if you have the stamina, and there's beautiful coffee shops and restaurants and cafes, um, I think it's a really good, very well presented, very well lit, very well structured display of material which often was overlooked or ignored or badly lit or badly positioned in different museums, mainly in the old museum in downtown, the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, which I still love and still has a wonderful future ahead of it. But the Grand Museum undeniably shows a lot of pieces that were formerly in the old museum to much better advantage. And the one thing I loved about it was other people might think it was tacky, but they played music, and the music was making me emotional. And there were things there that I think most Egyptologists haven't seen, and you're suddenly presented with these beautiful things, and it's really kind of it makes you feel this really, yeah, vibrant emotion. So if more museums were a little like that, yes, there are drawbacks. Yes, not everything is perfect, but no museum is perfect.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was thinking, were they playing music? I don't remember that.
They were when I was there.
Maybe.
Subtle
Well,
music.
actually, yeah. Well, normally I'm always listening to my own music, so maybe that's why I didn't realize.
Maybe, maybe.
I have to say, maybe I'm too traditional, but I like the museum, but it's so huge, it's overwhelming. It's kind of scary in some sense because you don't know how long it's going to take to visit the museum,
Yes,
and you don't know if you're going to survive the journey. And
exactly.
it was very nice to see, as you said, pieces that were not on display before, and it was a very nice visit. It was very long for me as well.
Yeah.
The staircase, it's huge. It took me like 3 or 4 hours just to arrive to the top, and then I had all the
Yes.
hours to visit.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a long day. but it was amazing. But still, the museum in downtown is the closest
Yeah,
to my heart. So
I
because
agree
it
with
has a
you.
charm. The museums that are located in new buildings are different. They are more modern, and the displays are better. The lighting is better. Um, Many things are better, but there is some kind of charm
Yeah.
in the museums that are located in all buildings, because the buildings themselves are a museum on their
Yes,
own.
a museum
So
piece,
that's why,
exactly.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah. Okay, so
I
we had,
think
sorry, yeah,
we
go ahead.
we we discussed this actually in Cairo, I think, but if you have an interest, if you have an Egyptological interest, it's a real joy and it's a real you and we did spend you could spend all day there. But I worry slightly, as I think I said to you, once the Tutankhamun gallery is open, this section, with this huge section with lots of other material in it, I think this will generally be bypassed by most visitors because they will not have time to go and see it. And there are amazing things, and things are, I think, very effectively picked out as highlights. But my God, if you have the Tutankhamun galleries, which are, I think, the same footprint again, how will normal people, civilians, how will normal tourists cope with that?
Absolutely. It happens the same with all the big museums, with the British Museum, the Louvre Museum. It's impossible. When I was younger, I also tried to see everything in a day because I didn't know if I was going to have the chance to visit it again. So I would spend the whole day there. And of course, I wouldn't see everything.
Sure.
Now that I'm older and I don't have
You
so
and me
much
both.
energy, I try to go to a museum and just for a walk to see some
Hmm.
galleries that I'm especially interested in, not trying to see everything. But if people is traveling to Egypt, of course, they want to see as much as possible. But Egypt, it's a very long journey. It's a very tough journey because there are always so many activities, and the tour guides and everything are always rushing people to see everything as fast as possible. So I agree with you. I don't know how they're going to manage. I don't know what they're going to end up seeing. I don't know if the museum in downtown is going to be still visited with the National Egyptian Civilization Museum,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Grand
so many
Egyptian Museum,
museums.
plus the Egyptian Museum in Tahrir. I mean, it's a lot.
I think there is, from what I understand from our colleagues, there is a future for the old museum in downtown. And I agree, it's just a wonderful experience. I've got lots of really good memories spent there. It's so densely packed, full of great objects. I think the key thing I would say to anyone who's planning a visit, is, yeah, pace yourself and try and, yeah, see as much as you can, but also allow that time, to go for a coffee and really absorb what you've seen and to talk to someone else about it. I know we've done this. If you've got friends who's in Cairo, go for a beer afterwards and talk about what did you see? Because I think there's so much detail that you miss if you maybe just walk around on your own. It's good to compare notes. That would be my advice to anyone visiting, planning a visit.
That's a good advice. And what do you think about the announcement that we have seen today about
Well, I
Zahi
mean, yeah,
Hawass?
when
I
we're
think you've seen it, right?
yeah, so people ask all the time, is there stuff still to find in Egypt? And the answer is absolutely, definitely yes. So we're speaking, in the first week of January, pretty much, 2025. And today, Dr. Zahi Hawass and the Ministry of Antiquities announced there had been very significant finds in the, I guess, the eastern part of the Hatshepsut Causeway at Deir el-Bahri, the Asasif region. And it's kind of difficult to pick out the individual finds from the announcement. But one thing that really struck me was, because I'm interested in Hatshepsut and interested in the role of Senenmut in her building program, one thing which is lost essentially is the Valley Temple, this lower temple, like gateway temple, if you like, to the whole temple complex of Jessaru, the Deir el-Bakri complex. And so today, Dr. Hawass essentially announced they have found evidence of this, along with earlier New Kingdom finds. So I would love to know more. I hope they publish more information. But I think it's important to realize that, this is a deliberate policy of the Egyptian government to engage potential tourists. Egypt has lots of heritage from throughout its history, and it's a way of keeping pharaonic archaeology especially, but Egyptian heritage in general in the media spotlight.
Yeah, that's true. Sometimes it's difficult. I get these questions also very often, like, are all those discoveries real? Or because I
Yeah.
keep receiving notifications about new discoveries, and sometimes it's difficult to distinguish because then you see the date and that discovery was made like 3 or 4 years ago, and it's coming up again, and you don't really know why. So, regarding your research about Hatshepsut and Senenmut, what do you
Mhm.
think you can use about this new discovery, or by the details that have been released, you still don't know?
From the photographs I've seen, so some of our colleagues were there at the announcement and took quite detailed photos of the objects which were on display as part of the kind of press conference. Based on this, the interesting thing is, although the details are quite sketchy, it's fairly clear that some types of objects, which are in Manchester Museum or the British Museum or Cairo Museum, more of the same type have been found. So it's almost like the smoking gun. It's the location. Things are being found in situ where the items that are maybe now in museums, there was no precise recorded provenance. So now you can pinpoint, oh, this is probably where these things have come from. And in the case of Senenmut, who I believe, according to various accounts, is named on some of these objects, that confirms my suspicion, which will appear in my book, hopefully, soon, that he was involved in all of Hatshepsut's building program. It just confirms some things we already know. But like you said, there are so many things. There's the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. There's the Grand Museum. There's the Old Museum. There's the Airport Museum. I don't know if you checked out the Airport Museum in Terminal 2.
Actually,
It's
I'm not quite sure.
small, but it's good. The International Terminal 2 at Cairo Airport has some really nice pieces of Hatshepsut in it. The question is, how do you distribute things meaningfully? Like, how do you should there be a Deir el-Bakri museum where you just get Deir el-Bakri stuff? Should there just be a Tanis museum or a, you know, Giza
Well,
museum?
yeah, but I guess that also brings us to the topic that there are some locations in Egypt that are not easy to handle. So I guess, for example, Tanis is not a place that tourists can reach easily, or
Mhm.
Bubastis, or many other places in the Delta or in Medium Egypt. So I guess it has to be centralized, but everything goes to Cairo in the end, which is, I don't think it's the best
I think,
thing,
like
but
in other
it's
places,
complicated.
it's complicated. Yeah. I mean, in the UK, where material is found in the north of England and it's sent to London in the south, there is resentment from the local community. The same is happening in Egypt, and I'm sure in other
Absolutely.
places. So, yeah. Um, yeah, I'm not sure. One thing I really do appreciate, and I'm looking forward to visiting, inshallah, as we say, next month, is the work of the Spanish mission, a Spanish Egyptian mission at TT11, the tomb of Jehuti and the tomb of Heri,
Mhm.
where they have excavated but also cleaned and then installed like museum quality lighting on the
Yeah.
above the walls. And this is exciting because Yes, it's not as it would have originally appeared, let's be clear,
Mm.
but it is a way of viewing beautiful artwork, if we want to call it that, in situ, in context, to rather than seeing it in a museum, which, although museums are great, they can be quite clinical and they are divorced. They're different. They're separate from the place that the objects were made or intended to be displayed. So that's a really good case of a fairly small monument that has been beautifully restored and conserved and presented to the public.
Yeah, that's also true. I've learned this year that there is a big difference between visiting a tomb that has been already prepared for the public, that I don't know what's the English word, musealized. Well,
Yeah,
there is a word in Spanish.
museumified. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because I found out that I hadn't realized that I hadn't had the feeling that I was in a tomb, in a
Hmm.
funerary space. I knew it was a tomb, of course,
Hmm.
but I didn't have the feeling that there had been people buried there because the mummies are not there anymore. The mummies are in museums or in
Hmm.
storerooms or elsewhere. And I knew it was a tomb, but I didn't have the feeling. So when you have the chance to visit a tomb that hasn't been, that it's not open to the public, and you see mummies inside, and
And
it's kind of like
you smell the smell.
the
I
smell
think
of dust,
you and
the
I
smell of
both went into
years of
some of
the
these
ages. It's really
tombs.
amazing. So I think it's really important to be able to see artifacts in situ. I think it's really nice. So this new discovery, because I only saw the announcement pretty quickly. So I saw the pictures, but I couldn't really identify what it was. Is it like a tomb and they have placed display cases inside and they have put
Yes.
everything inside. And I saw a picture that looked like they had left things as they were where they when they found them. I saw pictures, but as I wasn't there, I couldn't really identify what it was about. What do you
I
know?
don't think I know too much more than you do, but when I was reading the reports and from experiencing that kind of event myself sometimes, they will set up display cases in the tombs just for the press conference. So those objects will then, of course, be moved into storage or to a museum. But I think there's an element of theatricality to say people are brushing things and people are just discovering things to give it this kind of dynamic quality. One thing, just reflecting on what you just said, I had this experience myself where going into spaces, tomb spaces, where colleagues were actively working and they were not prepared for tourists and not prepared for general visitors, I was reminded of, in fact, museum storerooms, as in Manchester Museum, we have an organic storeroom, and there is a certain aroma, there's a certain smell of mummified material. And I was experiencing the smell that I associate with this particular storeroom in situ. And in some ways, places are often cleaned out and kind of sanitized for people to visit. And the point about those tombs, almost every tomb in Luxor, in the West Bank of Luxor, was intensely reused. It wasn't that it was closed in the New Kingdom and was never used again. Okay, some were like that, but many were intensely reused. Third Intermediate Period, Late Period, Roman period, stuffed with mummified flesh, every available space. And if you visit someone who's excavating these, there are bags of mummified body parts and bandages, and the smell is sometimes totally overpowering. So I don't know what's the best way of allowing some of those spaces to be accessible while still demonstrating and suggesting how they were used over hundreds of years.
Yeah, yeah. It's really difficult. Well, now I wanted to talk a little bit more about your books. How many books have
Oh,
you published?
well, I'm quite busy at the moment. I don't have a copy of it to hand, but so I did publish a short book recently called Brief Histories, Ancient Egypt. It's the first in a series of books published here in the UK, but hopefully available internationally, which is really a short, snappy guide. Everything you wanted to know, but were afraid to ask. So it takes 10 topics as 10 questions. And I mentioned before, I am working on a book about Senenmut, a biography of him in a series with American University in Cairo Press. And that will be more scholarly, there'll be footnotes and references, and, I hope you will read it and we can discuss it. But the Brief Histories book is meant for someone with no knowledge of Egyptology. And I wanted to structure it as 10 questions I have been asked in taxis or barber shops or cocktail bars. Because there's always someone, oh, you're interested in Egyptology, tell me about
Yes.
this. So I tried to do it as what 10 questions have I been asked in those situations, especially in like a taxi or a barber shop where you're trapped for some time, you can't move. So you get asked the question. So I re really enjoyed it because there are no references. There are a few images, but they aren't picture books, the Brief History series. So it was quite liberating to write without having to always put in a footnote. So I hope if anyone would like to buy them, they're available, signed copies through Manchester Museum's online shop.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Um, well, and what is are you doing well, you said you were busy with more books with a book of Senemnut, so I guess
Hmm.
you're busy with that research. When are you going to release it? Do you have a date or no pressure?
I can say the Senenmut book is still in process of being written. Um, I have recently collaborated with a colleague at the Egypt Exploration Society, and I've been very proud to be on their board of trustees for the last few years. So their collections manager, Dr. Stephanie Boonstra, and I have edited a book which will be coming out in September called Ancient Egypt in 50 Discoveries. So it is the first, 140 years of the Egypt Exploration Society. And so we've worked with experts around the world, colleagues in Egypt, to present 50 of the discoveries, not necessarily objects, but discoveries that the Society has helped to make in Egypt and Sudan. So that book is pretty much finished. I've just seen the final draft of it, so it will go into production very soon. So I can say by September, it's a book published by the EES, by the Egypt Exploration Society. So that and Senenmut, hopefully, maybe by the end of the year. Fingers crossed. Inshallah.
So, okay, maybe
Inshallah.
for Christmas I will have it in my wish list.
Please add it to that Christmas list for 2025.
And you said you were going to travel to Egypt next month, you said?
Yes,
So
yes.
you're going with a group, or
I'm
how do you travel to
going.
Egypt?
I'm going with. I'm going with a tour group to do a cruise from Aswan up to Cairo, which will be wonderful, on a very old-fashioned steamer. It's one of only two steamships that still operate on the Nile. And
Sudan?
then uh, I'm hoping to coordinate this with Spanish colleagues. First week in March, I will go and take a group of students out for an intense Hatshepsut Senenmut course for 1 week, and we will visit the two tombs of Senenmut, which is very exciting because I've only visited one of them in the past, and we will visit Jose's work at the tomb of Chehuti.
Okay, going on. Okay. Nice, nice. It's very nice. Well, thank you very much for your time. I think it's been
Thank
a really long
you, Alicia.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
very much. It was a real pleasure to have you here. And well, we will be updated about your work. We are very excited to see your recent books released, and we wish you all the best. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank
See
you
you
both.
soon.
Bye bye.
Bye.